Well, I'm out here feeding the birds again this morning, as I do every morning, and once again got another two common occurrence. It's been happening as of lately. Look at the 3 o'clock. Every morning, at least one, sometimes as many as 3. I've fed these birds every winter for 8 years now, minus last winter because we spent it in the Philippines, but never seen anything like this until this year after this fog rolled in. Well, as you can see with that heartbreaking opening scene there, it's still going on. I want to point out a couple of things. I just know what the naysayers will say. You'll mention that it was somewhat mutilated. It must have been attacked by a hawk. So let's address that first. No, number one, as daybreak began to break this morning, that cardinal was already there and it was fully intact. I get up between 4 and 4:30 most mornings. I'm generally at work by 5. I pride myself on getting more work done by the time the sun comes up than most folks do in an entire day. I saw the fully intact cardinal as soon as it was light enough to see outside. So whatever scavenged on it was in the last few hours. It's approximately 9:30 a.m. right now. So it's been daylight for about 2.5 hours. We have raccoons. We have a possum that lives under a brush pile right at our gate. So I don't know what it was. So that's number one. Number two, there has been no more fog incidences here on our property in days. So I would suspect what a lot of folks are starting to question, and that's the theme of today's video here, and this is based upon emails you guys have sent in, comments in the comment section. What happens when the snow begins to melt in the runoff? And once it gets into the watershed, what are we going to face? So that's what we're going to talk about today. No one still has any clue specifically what's going on. I've called it, been saying the same thing a couple times now. Doesn't really make me a popular guy, but let's get into what you guys are thinking. And I must admit, something very strange happened overnight with these emails. I had a few more than I usually get. I usually average 200 a day. Probably had about 250 emails come in since I checked yesterday for most recent emails. And there were no trolls. There were no bots. There were no government shills. Not a single person that emailed me told me how much I suck and how much they hate me. And as a matter of fact, I got more emails of encouragement overnight than I've ever gotten in the 15 years I've been a social media content creator. It blows my mind just how wonderful those of you who are still here, who have still stuck around, actually are. Maybe some of you got something out of my talk about social capital yesterday, or not social capital, but emotional capital yesterday, and how it's just not worth spewing out all these negative emotions because you're really just hurting yourself. It's like putting a glass of poison on the table between you and the person that you don't care too much for, and you drinking it hoping they die. You're killing yourselves with that negativity. So thank you that last night all these messages that came in were positive. So dozens of you didn't even send me stories about what you thought might be going on or about your personal experiences. You just told me, hey, Kevin, you're doing a good job. Keep it up. I appreciate you. I enjoy your show. I appreciate you. Thank you. Now, let's get on with Charlie from South Jersey. Charlie writes, and it's a very similar scenario to what we just saw in the opening scene of this video. Charlie says, I was one of those people that assumed that you were just saying stuff to get subscribers to your channel. I had an experience in my yard that has changed my mind about you. I'm the kind of person, okay, and I just want to stop right there. Charlie, hey, no ill feelings. I mean, you're just one of many. People are, seeing people like me come out here and talk about stuff that's going on, and you're hearing about it elsewhere. If you haven't experienced it, you would have a tendency to question it. Well, Charlie experienced it, as we'll all soon hear. Charlie continues, I'm the kind of person that, along with my wife, keeps to myself. I have a nice home in the South Jersey Pinelands, and even though it is winter, I still keep tabs on how things are going. As do I, Charlie, as you can see. I pride myself on my beautiful lawn. I have been battling moles for years. Even in winter, they stay active and busy trying to destroy my lawn. I'm not wanting to harm them. I try natural ways in controlling them. That's how we do things around here as well. We use no pesticides. I have a couple of ladies who have chinchillas who actually, on our Etsy store, I always plug my books. We also sell chew sticks for pet mammals like rabbits, chinchillas. We have apple, peach, pear, plum from our orchards. I'm happy to be able to say we never use pesticides on any of that stuff. Okay. Well, the other day when I came home from a fire alarm, as I'm a volunteer firefighter, Charlie, thank you for your service, I noticed a cylinder-shaped flying craft above my property. It was a shiny metallic-looking object that made no noise. It hovered and then moved in what seemed to be a pre-programmed mode around the perimeter of my property, which is over 2 acres. I noticed that I was having trouble concentrating on the object, and there was a strange scent in the air. I watched the object's methodical trip around my property, and then suddenly it took off straight up into the air and disappeared. Normally, at the time in the evening that this occurred, the birds are in full song, but this evening, things were quiet. My wife asked me when I got into the house as to why I was standing in the yard by my truck for over an hour, looking up at the sky as she could see me from the house out by our barn. I said, an hour? Somehow I had lost track of time because the time I spent looking skyward only seemed like a few minutes. The next morning when I went outside in my yard, I noticed that it had several dead moles, a few dead birds scattered around my lawn. What could this thing that I viewed be doing, and why the dead wildlife? It made me wonder about your quail. Kevin, do you have any ideas? Charlie in South Jersey. Again, Charlie, it's ironic that you sent this last night. We showed you the cardinal in our yard, and as I mentioned during the filming of that scene, this has become a common occurrence. Yeah, I mean, I kind of have an idea of what's going on, but let's listen to more of our viewers. I did get another email from First Sergeant Stormy, and she sent images with this one. Basically, I'm going to paraphrase what she sent. She had a tick on her head. There was a tick. Now, she's in Oregon, and she mentioned the last couple of months there's been a ton of this fog out there, strange things in the sky. So she's at home painting a watercolor painting perfectly fine, and her roommate notices a tick on her head, on the right side of her head above her right eye. So she takes it off, removes the tick, and within half an hour, Stormy's eye is swollen shut. And I mean, she looks like Rocky Balboa after he got out of the ring with Apollo Creed in Rocky 1. And she went to the ER, and even the ER doctor was shocked. The doctor came in and says, wow, that's swelling. And Stormy told the story of the tick, and the doctor was so confused because the doctor said, this is not a typical response for a tick bite. And they did blood work, and Stormy's blood levels came back low. She says she feels perfectly fine. She says she just doesn't look the greatest. She just, like I said, she looked like Rocky Balboa after getting out of the ring with Apollo Creed. But then she went on to say, she brought up something we made a video about last week. She says, Kevin, what does happen if they are spraying us with something and it's in the snow? What happens when the snow melts off? What happens when this stuff enters the groundwater? Could she have had the reaction to that tick bite because the tick was having a reaction to what was sprayed? I mean, this is how the food chain works, people. That's why you got to watch your pollutants. That's why, listen, I know this burns me up. You see a lot of yuppies out there with their Severin 7 and their this weed spray stuff because they're too lazy or they don't want to get dirty getting down on their knees and pulling weeds up by hand. So they just spray. That stuff goes into the water system. I don't care how safe they market it as being. Once upon a time, they said cigarettes didn't cause cancer. Remember that? And if you didn't smoke, you weren't cool because it was perfectly harmless, they said. All right, so anyway, continuing with this theme, let's get on with it. This is from Mrs. G 2021, and this was left as a comment on yesterday's video. Mrs. G 2021 is a member of the channel. Thank you for that. FYI, all of you members who have been ordering books from the Etsy store, they're going out today, and I did ship your free copy of The Box, a novel I wrote in 2017. Another perk of membership. Thank you to all the members who have become members. Mrs. G 2021 writes, I fully believe this drone bit was our government the entire time, but I still want answers. What's the stuff falling to the ground? Ash-like particles for some particles, some chunkier, some smaller, and landing on my husband and I. What was the strange fog and smell? Why, shortly after the fog and smell, did I test positive for E. coli in my urine? Interesting. Why do I always hear an engine humming, kind of over my house, and when I run out, there's nothing there? Why did my husband and I both have strange sore throats and headaches, and I'm still having a headache? And why am I so irritable at least 3 or 4 days a week? That's out of character for me, and I hate it. I'm always happy and upbeat and genuinely love my life back here in my little chunk of woods. Why does my perfectly healthy 2.5-year-old dog act scared to go outside by herself? She's a working/hunting breed. She's fearless, and I've even seen her in attack mode, but now she's scared. Why does she hear everything I hear now? My dog and I are on the same page. WTF. Thank you, Kevin, for all you do and put up with. Thank you. I mean, you're asking the same questions everyone seems to be asking, even folks like Charlie in Jersey who had their doubts in the beginning and were questioning people like me, but stuck around long enough until they saw these things for themselves, and now they're asking the same questions. Well, I got an email, a lengthy one, that might answer some of those. I want to preface this by saying I am not claiming that I agree or disagree with everything you're about to hear, but it was sent to me by somebody that I truly believe is being genuine, sincere, and honest, and it may or may not answer some of the questions everybody's asking. They want to remain anonymous, very much so, as you'll find out as I read this. Kevin, I will tell you exactly what's going on, and I'll make it as short version as I can. Actually, you made a video a couple of weeks ago where you talked about, and she put in quotes, feeling like a high school kid, end quote, when you went to Walmart because, quote, everyone else in there was so old. I literally jumped out of my recliner, which is rare for me these days. I'll be 76 this spring. Happy upcoming birthday. Because I thought you'd finally figured it out, but alas, you hadn't. You just talked about how old everyone in Walmart was, and then you went on with something else. Okay, here it is. But you cannot use my name. If you do, I will call you a liar and claim that I sent this email to you as a prank to make you look bad. Got it? I can assure you, Kevin, that's not what I'm doing, but do not use my name. Hey, I'm not gonna. Okay, I am retired from the Department of Interior. I was a secretary, not a scientist, but let me tell you, in my more than 40 years with the department, I got to know very many high-ranking folks because I worked for them, and I became very close, personal friends with some of them. Heck, I even married one. My husband passed away about 5 years ago. My condolences. But all of our friends from the department that we were close with still stay in touch and visit me often as I do them. So here's what's going on. Way back in the 60s, I became privy to certain spraying operations, she puts in quotes. What I will tell you is all that I know, or at least all that I can understand. Again, I was never one of the scientists, so much of what I'm trying to tell you is stuff that was way over my head. But I know you are a smart young man, and many of your followers strike me as highly intelligent, just from reading their comments. Ignore the a-holes, they're everywhere. True that. And I have been. Anyway, I became knowledgeable, again, in the 60s, that there were times, many times, mind you, Kevin, when the department would test spray. And by this, I do not mean they would spray a new chemical to see if it worked or not. Kevin, and the next paragraph is in, like the whole second half of this paragraph is in caps, so this is very important. Pay close attention. Kevin, they would mix chemicals and substances into known sprays and then spray, and they would do it to see if anyone out there would end up detecting what they'd put in the spray. And yes, this is all in caps for a reason. So that was the test spray. It wasn't that they were testing an unknown product, something new, newly developed. They were testing something that they knew what it was, and they were trying to find out if anybody would catch it. She continues, Think about this, Kevin. Flyers are circulated throughout a community announcing that the department will be spraying for ticks the following week. Remember Stormy's story, First Sergeant Stormy. They come through to spray and no one questions it because they've been notified. And many people actually come out to thank the men and women doing the spraying because now they don't have to worry about ticks and Lyme disease and all the other nasty things they carry. And the whole while, and again, she goes back to all caps, no one even thinks to consider what else they might be spraying into the environment. I just remember this, I've got my fingers crossed. This reminded me of a story I've been wanting to share for the last couple of weeks that I just keep forgetting. I've crossed my fingers so I'll remember because this has to do with human behavior. I'm going to share it with you here in a minute after I finish this. This might be answering a lot of these questions we've all had. So now she continues. Now, Kevin, fast forward to our current drone situation. The fog, the mist, certain bacteria that are showing up in the melted snow and other aftermath of the fog and the mist. Look at what is showing up in people's pools. Look at the lack of birds and other wildlife, living at least. Heck, look at your quails. Yeah, and this morning, one of our cardinals, wild cardinal as it was. Kevin, my husband and I used to talk often, along with our friends from the department, about how it was just a matter of time before the ruling class, and by this, I don't mean the men and women in office. I mean the money men and some women too, behind the men and women in office. How long before they decide to cut all the dead weight of society? And by dead weight, I mean those who do not produce. And those like myself who once upon a time produced, but no longer do. Kevin, I know you're a reader and a writer, and I have no doubt that you've read The Giver by Lois Lowry. If so, do you remember what they used to do to people in the book once they no longer produced? Should you decide to share this email with your audience, which I give you my full permission to do, share with them exactly what happened to senior citizens in the book. Actually, I did read The Giver. The first time I read it, I was a college student. It was for an English literature class. It's the only book I was ever forced to read during my education years that I actually enjoyed. And FYI, I personally believe one of the biggest reasons so many people don't enjoy reading is because they're forced to read a lot of books that are just not enjoyable to read in their youth. This is an example, and even Stephen King says this. Stephen King, he's my favorite writer, despite his views outside of writing. He says that writing cannot be taught, but it can be learned. And to be good at it, you've only got to do two things. You got to read a lot and you got to write a lot. And he says, nobody goes off to college and majors in English literature and is taught how to become a good writer. But a lot of people that go off to college and major in English literature become terrible writers because of the crap they're forced to read. An example I will give is Wuthering Heights by one of the Bronte sisters. Was it Emily Bronte? That was the most boring book I've ever read in my life. Now, I read it not because I was forced to, but because I was reading the top 100, what's considered to be the best 100 classics ever written in the English language. And I did this, I took a break from writing, and I know this is too much information, but I took a break from writing for a while and refused to write another word until I'd read all 100 of those books because I wanted to, and some of them I'd already read. I wanted to work on my skills. But anyway, in The Giver, and they made an okay movie about it just a few years back. You can watch the movie. This part of the story is the same in both. You'll have to excuse me. It sounds like somebody way down there on the road probably almost hit a deer or something. They were honking. We have a ton of deer around here. But basically, in the novel and in the movie, once people reached their golden years, once they were 65 or 70, in the retirement age, they were no longer productive. They were no longer going to produce. They would have this big ceremony for them, and everybody would show up, and they'd walk them down the aisle, and they'd talk about how great they were, and they would walk off into this bright light. And this society had been led to believe that once you enter that light, you go on to the next world, heaven, so to say, where you just live in this even more perfect utopia. Because the whole gist of The Giver was that this society was a utopia. There was no racism, there was no gender inequality, none of this stuff. People couldn't even see color. They had been so brainwashed. It was like the woke agenda before the woke agenda was a thing. Everything was just gray. as far as how they saw it, even though there were reds and greens and oranges. That's how brainwashed they were. Well, in reality, what would happen is these older folks would walk into that light, they'd go off stage, there'd be somebody waiting on them in the back with a pew-pew. Remember, we're on social media, so I've got to watch what I say. And they would get pew-pewed in the head. And then they'd be thrown off the side of a cliff into the, like if you watched Yellowstone, the train station, they were taken to the train station. They never returned. That was the reality of it. So that's what she's talking about. She's talking about potentially, according to her and her friends and her late husband, who worked for the Department of Interior for many, many years, have had this conversation about when are they going to start doing it to us in real life, in real time, once so many within our population has been deemed to be unproductive. Okay, let me continue her story. Apologize for a little tangent on how I became a okay to some degree writer. Okay, now here she goes back again. Think back on your recent trip to Walmart. All those old people. How many of them were in the electric carts because their physical condition deems them unable to walk or stand for long periods of time? A lot of them. How many of them looked like the Walking Dead? Most of them. How many were deathly obese? All of them. I mean, I'm interjecting. Yeah. Are you picking up what I'm laying down, as you like to say in your videos? Yeah, absolutely. Kevin, I think the time that my late husband and I and our friends from the department feared is upon us. I believe the spraying in some form or another maybe by way of these drones, or humans out in their hazmat suits appearing to innocently be spraying for ticks or rabid bats or whatever they canvassed the neighborhoods with flyers for the week before, are actually to eradicate a much larger creature. Say a creature the size of a human, an unproductive or no longer productive human. Think about it, Kevin. Surface depopulation can be done in a number of ways, and who is it that you want to keep? Those who can and still do produce. The non-producers, they are no longer an asset. They are a liability, a burden on the producers, hence no longer needed. Put that in your bowl and smoke it. Just be careful what you might be inhaling in what appears to be the perfectly natural and assumedly safe environment around you when you do. A longtime follower that you had better not mention by name, or I will troll/bot you like a couple government shills have in a couple of your recent videos. Have a great day and sleep tight tonight, knowing you still produce. But Kevin, just remember, all of our days are numbered. Shoot, and here I've been contemplating retiring. Not now. Okay, so here's what I wanted to tell you. Basically, at one point in the story where she was talking about how they would canvass neighborhoods and hand out flyers, and so everybody would just take it at their words. They've had so many people email and say in the comments when I talked about the delivery guy that opened our gate and came in after dark back in November, on the day of my birthday, actually, how odd that seemed. And we finally started locking our gate after not having locked it for the 8 years we've been here. So people replied to that and sent in emails about how they've had people show up and claim to be like employees of the local utility company, and they were there to test meters. Next thing they know, they're missing things or something bad happens. They call the utility company to report it, and the utility company informs them that they did not have personnel out there checking meters. So most people don't question much of anything. But here's the story I wanted to tell you, and I'll end with this because I've got a lot of things I got to do. I actually got to go clip some. Now that the snow and the ice, a couple of ladies ordered some apple cuttings for their chinchillas about 10 days ago, but it's been too snowy and icy out here to get them off the trees. They were covered with ice. So I've got to go do that. But about 2 weeks ago, we had been down in Richmond, and we were coming back on the Interstate 64 back to the Charlottesville exits. And the storm came in from out of nowhere, and it was weird. And somebody mentioned this in a recent comment, and I addressed this. It was a thunder and lightning storm in the middle of winter, and it's the first time I've ever seen a storm like that in all the years I've been in Virginia. Came here in 1999 originally, left for 10 years, spent most of that time overseas, Southeast Asia, Europe, the Middle East. Did spend a couple of years on the West Coast. I'd never seen a thunder and lightning storm like that in the dead of winter, but I saw one that day, and my family was with me, dearly, and our son Daniel. We're coming back down the interstate, and all of a sudden, traffic backs up. And I say, oh, to myself and to them, oh, great, there's a wreck. One of these yuppies, you're supposed to slow down during inclement weather conditions, but a lot of yuppies don't. They just keep driving 80 miles an hour in a 70 mile an hour zone, even though they can't see, and then they slide off the road. But that wasn't the case. Let me tell you what had happened. Because we came up, we were probably 20 car lengths back, and the cars in both lanes. We're in the right lane because I don't hang out in the left lane like a yuppie. If I got to pass, I'll pass, and then I get back in the right lane. So I'm on the right lane. What had happened is a tree had been knocked down, either by the high wind or lightning, and it was a pine tree. It wasn't a white pine. It was a loblolly pine, also known as a Virginia pine. So it had fallen. It was covering both lanes. However, the right lane was where the tip of the tree was, and the tip did come out past the end of the lane over into the berm, but it was clearly high enough to drive under. But nobody was driving under it. Everybody stopped. Everybody just stopped. Oh, what do we do? What do we do? And it was still storming, mind you, and we're in the middle of nowhere, halfway between Richmond and Charlottesville. There's nothing there. No offense to people who live in Louisa or Orange. Those are beautiful communities. But you know what I'm saying? So I'm sitting there, we're 20 cars back, and I'm like looking around, and everybody's like just looking around dumbfounded with these. They look like sheep going off to the slaughter look on their face. Some of them were on their phones, some of them were cursing. I looked over, the berm was as wide as both lanes, and it was a solid berm. It was actually paved, it wasn't grass. I was like, and Daniel was in the back seat. I said, hey, Daniel, let me show you something about human behavior. He says, what's that? I said, the majority of human beings, just like the majority of animals, all living species, are followers. Very few of us, and I include myself in this, are leaders. I said, watch what happens when somebody is brave enough and courageous enough to step forward, take charge, and lead. Watch how everyone else follows. He says, what are you talking about, Dad? My wife's like, what are you talking about? Can you speak like plain English for once? Because English isn't even her first language. It's her fifth language. So I put the truck back in drive, pull out very slowly, just start going down the berm. And now everybody had stopped about 30 yards before this tree. So I pull right back in front of the car in front, and nobody's honking on their horns. Nobody's being upset. Everybody's just like, what do we do? And then I drove right underneath the tip of that tree. And then I just kept on my way heading to where I was going. So I don't know if you knew this or not about the interstate highway system. It's actually a weapon system. Yeah, you thinking I'm done lost my mind again, Crazy Lake? No, let me tell you about it. It was designed by President Eisenhower, former commander of all Allied forces in World War II, designed Operation D-Day, saw it through. He's the one, and actually a couple of years ago when my family and I went to the Grand Canyon, we went through Kansas. We spent the night in Abilene, Kansas, his hometown, and we got to drive on the very first 8 miles of U.S. Interstate Highway that was open back then. They opened it there in his home state to honor him because it was his thing. Part of the construction of the U.S. Interstate Highway system is that for every 5 miles worth of interstate, there's got to be at least 1 mile that is perfectly straight. That's the weaponization part of it. What do you mean? Well, it's not for offense, it's for defense. In the event we're ever attacked here at home and the president must flee D.C., he or she, someday it's going to be a she, can't wait to see it. Just didn't want the last couple of she's that were running. If they need to get an Air Force One or a Marine One and escape and go somewhere, they need to have a safe place to land. But what if their secret bunker under the Greenbrier Resort in Greenbrier County, West Virginia, which isn't so secret anymore, is not an option? What do? Well, they needed to be able to go anywhere in the country to just hide out until the coast was clear. That's why for every 5 mile section of U.S. Interstate Highway system, at least 1 mile is perfectly straight. That's so Air Force One can land. They need to land in Iowa, Kansas, Virginia, Tennessee, the great nation of Texas, in military jets, helicopters. That's why it's like that. Now, with that said, we make it under the tree. We just entered that part that was a 1 mile straight strip. So I'm driving down this, getting back up to speed, And my wife and son are looking back saying they're all just sitting there. I said, by the time we get to the end of this 1 mile stretch, every car back there will be following us. Sure enough, just before we entered the next turn, I could see the headlights in all my mirrors. My family was laughing. They were like, oh my gosh, you were right. Here they come. All of them are coming. And Daniel was like, how did you know that would happen? I said, Daniel, I've been paying attention. Okay, I've been around for more than half a century. Unlike most of my peers, I've been paying attention to what's going on around me. And I know that the majority of you folks who watch this channel have been as well. That's why you're here. It's what keeps you coming back. So I hope you got something out of today's stories. Let us know what's going on. Send the emails. The email address is crazylake@mail.com. I appreciate all of you. See you for more next time.